in 1987, actually, I was born to do teacher education programs. And in the midst of that, no, earlier than that, I met Ron Miller at a conference in Massachusetts. And then he came to Atlanta to visit my school where I was teaching and talk about holistic education review. And from that launched a pretty good friendship. In 88 or early 89, maybe, 88, I suggested that we have a gathering of all kinds of holistic educators from all the different streams. And he said he'd think about it. And 4 months later, he called me back, said he thought about it. Let's do it. We had a meeting in Chicago in 89. Formed an organization called GATE, Global Alliance for Transforming Education. In 1990, we met in Colorado, Estes Park, and there were a large group of people there, and we authored a document called Education 2000, A Holistic Perspective. And it had 10 principles, which have gone on and been translated into many, many languages. I was asked to be the executive director, got a little funding. So my responsibility was to travel around and share what GATE was about. And in doing so, people would always say, where can I get an education like this? So let me just quickly share the 10 principles. So for our Spanish-speaking audience, the 10 principles are educating for human development, honoring students as individuals, the central role of experience, the nature of holistic education and its history, the new role of educators, freedom of choice, educating for participatory democracy, educating for global citizenship, educating for earth literacy, and 10th one was spirituality and education. So with that, we had in mind the opportunity to put this together in a collaborative effort with Vermont College for a master's degree. And the master's degree was in holistic education. That began in 1996. And a couple of years later, we moved to Endicott College and changed it from holistic education to integrative learning because, believe it or not, holistic education had all kinds of negative eyes on it. People who didn't know what it was and thought it was some kind of religious training. So, yeah, we started and we actually have gone for 28 years. It's quite profound. I'm still in touch with many of the students who graduated early on, like 28 years ago. Some of them have gone on to create ecological small towns, one in France and another. They've done all kinds of things. One is the head of Alzheimer's in Norway for working with adults. Anyway, in 2016, we did a review required by the Accrediting Association. And in that review, we also realized we were simultaneously uh, modeling how we worked with students like it was a Montessori environment. One of our early students who was a Montessori teacher told us, you know, you've created Montessori for adults. This is when it was still holistic education. So it was great to see that these things about was seamlessly in the relationship between student teacher, the mentoring process, the, the questioning process, the freedom within limits. All of those segues were similar to Montessori or in holistic education in general. So that's a kind of a background in where we are. So Paul or Linda, I think Linda, you should go because you came on next.
Oh, okay. There's a chronology to it. Well, my background is as a career Montessori teacher. So I did a couple of levels of training. One is for the preschool Montessori child. The other level is for elementary students up to the age of 12. And after I completed that Montessori training program for elementary in Bergamo, Italy, there really weren't any comparable options for pursuing a graduate degree here in the States. And so I began an MEd program at a university, and it offered very little that actually enhanced my teaching or my knowledge, frankly. Um, and then we had an out of state move, our family did, and so I was unable to complete that degree. And it was years later that I learned about ties through Phil, and the Montessori integrative learning option was very intriguing. Especially, I was intrigued by the emphasis area option because one thing that I did not enjoy about the traditional MEd program was that I didn't really get to shape it in any way. I had no independence as a student to shape my own direction, to create my own learning program. And well, that's kind of what Montessori is about, is taking ownership of their own learning and pursuing what interests you, what creates a passion in you. Um, so the emphasis area in ties allows and allowed me as a graduate student to choose and shape my research. And that is very true to the Montessori approach for Montessori educators. And it's an appealing option too for traditional educators who also wish to have more independence in their choices. So I was able to select a topic of study that I sincerely wish to pursue. I was fascinated by what happened as children grew up and either their need for experiences in nature was fulfilled or not fulfilled. In other words, um, I knew that children were spending less time outdoors. I mean, any of us that are here today can think back on our childhood, and most likely your childhood was full of many more experiences in the natural world, just free play, than children typically have today. And as an educator, I was very concerned to see the disconnect. Um, so I wanted to research children and their relationship with nature. And I came to understand that many of the environmental issues that we have today stem from our whole society's deficit of time spent in and connecting with the natural world. We protect that which we love. And if we haven't come to love it enough because we haven't spent time in it, then we don't protect it. Now, as a TIES student, um, I was part of an international TIES online community because of the distance learning aspect. You know, there are students from Asia, students in Africa, students in my own state, students on the East Coast, on the West Coast, in Hawaii. I mean, people could sign in from all over the world. Um, and remarkably, the esprit de corps that developed was very supportive, and it was a very close knit group. Um, the other members of my cohort were similarly idealistic educators, and we shared a common vision of the goals of education. It was deepened by the TIES experience. And while I was in the program and after I finished the program, I have to say, I've never found another group of teachers that were so bonded by a shared purpose in my entire teaching career. And I taught for decades. And always taught in Montessori programs, and Montessori faculties are just populated by idealists for sure. But there was an intensity in our cohort that just was so uplifting. And I just never forget the feelings that I had. Um, Now, we had seminars, and they were in a dialogue form where there was usually an assigned set of readings. You took your own notes, and then you engaged in the dialogue by posting your reactions to the reading. Um, and you, through the seminar, which was largely led by the members of the cohort, there was a shared search for meaning, and we approached it with an open mind, using basically guidelines for dialogue. Um, Faculty facilitators would help. Sometimes they would introduce a quote, you know, to spur on conversation and see how people reacted to it. Sometimes they might introduce yet another source. My cohort members themselves often recommended additional resources that ended up helping me in my own emphasis area, even though they may not have chosen the same area. Um, and the readings were really compelling, and they were thought provoking. Dr. Gang wove together a collection of books that built upon one another from seminar to seminar. Um, and what unfolded for me as a Montessorian, and there were non Montessorians in the program as well, but what unfolded over the course of the seminars was a clear understanding of Montessori's main goal for education, and that is something called cosmic education. I don't know if you've heard that term. Um, but it means essentially an, an approach to education that raises human consciousness, raises our consciousness of our connection to the universe and to all life. Now, I had completed two previous Montessori trainings where this was broached, basically, but neither had so clearly laid out this main goal of Montessori, cosmic education. So through ties, as an experienced Montessori educator, I felt like I understood my own great work, as Thomas Berry would call it, or Montessori called it, the cosmic task, with much greater clarity. And I had a renewed sense of mission and just could not wait to employ some of these ideas with the students that I worked with. Um, Now, there were other benefits to being in the TIES program. I mean, I especially appreciated that it was a distance learning program so that I could work at home and I could skip a commute to a university. That was something I didn't really care for about my first MD program, because the time that I saved, I could use instead for reading and writing and participating in the seminars, writing the papers. So for certainly for working educators, and I would say a majority of the people that were in my program and that I've seen as a faculty member in TIES, are working educators. And so that's a practical solution to the shortage of time that teachers typically experience. And um, also, the seminars were asynchronous. So you didn't have to sign in on campus at a particular time. I mean, can you imagine with all the time zones that we're dealing with? What a mess that would create, right? I mean, it's already kind of difficult when you're mentoring somebody in the program to try to find a time to have a Zoom with your mentees, where everybody can attend and it's not just the god awful time of the day for them. Um, so, when you could sign in on your own schedule, you were able to follow along with the syllabus. You could read the postings of faculty and fellow students. You could respond without pressure. You didn't have to answer in the moment. I think that's really a disadvantage of in person learning. I mean, there are lots of advantages to it, but there are a lot of introverts in a classroom, and some people have some wonderful thoughts to share. But in that moment, if they're on the spot to respond to what's that student said over there, they need more time to think about it. And their thinking and their sharing would be so much more complete if they just had time to digest the ideas that are, being just floating around in the air. So I learned to really enjoy the fact that I could take my time. I didn't have to come up with an immediate answer. I could craft my own reflections. Um, and sometimes someone might have shared something, and I want to go back and read that passage again and clarify for myself, is that what the author intended? How do I interpret that? Um, Also, the asynchronous seminars meant that I could continue to be a classroom teacher. Teachers have a lot of take home schoolwork to do, planning, papers to check, all that it entails. I could still keep up with the graduate level program and still do a good job of being a classroom teacher at the same time. Um, I don't know if I should go into at this point, Phil, my experiences as a faculty member, or if I should come back to that later.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yes. Oh, did you want me to go on? I didn't quite hear what you said.
No, I was waiting for Paul.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But yeah, then we do want to hear again from you, Linda, for sure. Thank you. Thanks for
Yeah.
giving us a bit of a picture. So I joined Ties later. I don't know when. I'm really, whatever date I throw out, it'll be 5 years earlier than that. Um, I went in search of Dr. Gang after meeting Ron and talking with him and reading his stuff and hearing tales of the then legendary Global Alliance and the gathering in Colorado and Chicago and the statements on education. And, I'm like, I want to meet everyone who's been involved in this global movement. And Phil was high on the list. And then turns out by the time I came to him, he was back in the United States, having spent, I don't know, decades in New Zealand. And so synchronicity allowed us to connect. He's in Portland. I was living in Portland, actually. And anyway, Ties. So yeah, I mean, a lot of what Linda said, I think, gives you the beginning of that sense. I have 4 more philosophical sentences to talk about my experience in Ties, but first, just on a very practical level. So at any given moment in Ties, there might be 2 cohorts that are working their way through the program. Each cohort is 20 to 30 adult learners, usually. Does that seem about right, Phil?
Yeah.
And the people in the program are, as Linda said, mostly practicing teachers, but there are other people from every stage of life and all over the world do drop in as students. It's they're sort of, once you're in a cohort, you move along with that cohort through the sequence of seminars as Linda described them, the syllabus and sequence of books and texts are, as Linda said, rich and carefully curated so that, it's not a random assortment of literature. It really does lead the learners on a journey. Talk about it as a journey often. And each seminar involves the ingestion and digestion of the text that is the focus of the seminar. There are seminars that are different, but most of them. And then the weaving of the dialogue asynchronously, as Linda described. So people will post their thoughts, their reflections, and then others will speak to the previous postings in just this amazing process. Really early on, students are introduced to Bohemian dialogue, and that feels critical to the conversation being sufficiently weighty and deep and thoughtful and introspective and reflective and collaborative and dialogic. So there's this quality, this intangible but very real, visceral kind of quality of engagement and presence that you feel when you're involved in a seminar, and people are honest and vulnerable and questioning, and there's great humility and I don't know exactly where that alchemical magic comes from. It certainly emanates from the origins of the program, but it also is just about the I don't know, spirituality, I would say, of the faculty as facilitators of the dialogue. Like, we're not just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. Like the faculty is deeply committed to living and practicing some of these principles of holistic education, all of these principles of Montessori education, holistic education, cosmic education, integrative learning. And it's serious business with tremendous humor also. Like it's not like, I don't know, it's just lovely. So these 30 or so students are working their way through this curriculum, and then certain seminars sort of have these moments of pause, these breaks, where the students are asked to become observers, like real, thoughtful, fully present observers of life around them, and to reflect on that process, to observe themselves during moments of creativity, and to reflect on that. And there are prompts that guide the students through activities and experiences that, cue them up for that. But those observational seminars and those reflective moments are really important for letting this kind of heady syllabus, the curriculum that's like Krishnamurti and Thomas Berry and big thinkers, to kind of let that percolate and become internalized for students through real deep presencing and reflection is another element of the magic. Students during their year and a half, typically, as they work their way through the program, are asked to do some more formal writing as well. And so there are integrative papers that they write where they, yes, both sort of summarize the syllabus as they've experienced it, but then also to integrate that new learning, new knowledge, new understanding, integrate it with their own lived experiences and learned experiences, And those writings, those integrative papers, are often profound, real evidence of personal transformation. And such a privilege to be. So I work as a faculty member and mentor for some students, and you just watch this like blossoming of the human being, through their experience of ties, in a way that's just such a privilege. At the end or near the end of their program, they each produce a culminating paper or cumulative paper, and that those are works of art. They're magnum opus, like, and not every single paper is worth publishing and post and putting in a bookstore, but many of them are, and they certainly are for the student. So these are not throwaway papers, nor are they the academic grind of traditional higher ed writing. They're deeply personal. They're extremely reflective. So I don't know. I can't think of an example right now, but I might before our hour is up. Think of a student who just, they emerge through this process. Okay, I have one student who began as a beginning teacher. This was just a year or so ago. And she was a first-year teacher in a public school in Louisiana, and at the same time was in a romantic relationship and was getting married, and like all these life changes were happening for her regardless of ties. But the fact that she was in ties and going through these personal moments while being asked to consider her role in the cosmos and her place on Earth and her relationship with other people in community, like, was incredible. And that's, I don't know what the alchemy is, but it's kind of typical that we're able to engage with people while all of us, faculty and students, are going through these amazing journeys, right? So my 4 philosophical sentences, and then I'll stop. So maybe, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, which probably means 12, I was reflecting on ties and what it meant to me and the value of the program and stuff like that. So this is just a small piece of what I wrote. I said, there is a quality of being at ties, an ontology of presencing, a kind of generative listening that is difficult to describe, but is so clearly and instantly evident. Everything about the program, from content to context, belies the fact that this work is profoundly important. The individual student is honored and elevated. Each person's learning process is recognized and nurtured. TIE's success goes well beyond method and syllabus. It is a worldview, a consciousness that envelops the program, invading every aspect of the work like a steady, prolonged rainfall, seeping into the soil, and then slowly occupying a stream bed until all is immersed by the grace and beauty of this holistic learning community of care.
Wow, Paul. Oh my gosh.
Questions?
Seeping into the soil of the communities of care. Oh my goodness, Paul. Very poetic. So I have a question. For 20, 30 years, I've studied different authors, holistic education. Krishnamurti's still one of the closest to my heart. And I've considered who I am as a person lots of different times in relationship to my community, in relationship to the earth. I have never considered my role in the cosmos. Can you give me a few guiding questions that you might give to students that opens it up that widely?
Well, one of my favorite questions from my TIES experience is when I think it was Thomas Berry who asked, "Where do you live?" And should I offer his answer to the question? I live in the universe. You know, that is the cosmic approach to TIES. It's that I don't live in Evergreen, Colorado, in this house. I mean, we don't look up, we don't look out enough. And our origins go all the way back. I mean, Phil would probably be better qualified to talk about the supernova and it's sent all the elements all over the universe. And but when I was teaching kindergartners, I read a book to them as part of a project that had to do with my TIES work. And the name of the book was You Are a Star. And so it's just a beautifully illustrated little storybook that you could read to very young children. I was sharing it with 5-year-olds, right? 5 and 6-year-olds, about how the supernova sent all these particles all over the universe. And, you know, they're on Earth, they're in our food, they're in us. That, you know, that star is part of us, the supernova, and all those elements. That's part of our it's part of our heritage, our biology. And oh my gosh, when the story was over, I mean, I recorded it and I observed the children through a recording that I had permission to make from the parents of the children involved. The way that discussion went afterwards, it was incredible. My best teaching experiences, and I've taught for decades, were after my TIES experience. I mean, I will never forget how powerful that experience was with those children. They were just ready to burst out of their skins. There were so many questions. They were like, "Oh my gosh, oh my gosh! I mean, the stars are in us. How about my cat? How about my cat Luna? Does Luna have stardust?" It's like their conversation was amazing, and I tingle just thinking about the conversation I had with them after that particular lesson. I had my best teaching experiences after my TIES experience. I think for me that says it all right there. That I felt like I was doing so much better a job of helping these children learn to be a part of our earth and to look up. I had kids come in and say, "Oh, last night I saw Orion, Miss Linda." And and I saw the belt first, and then I saw Sirius the star. I mean, and I'm talking about 5-year-olds.
So yes, there is a very deep emotional part of this, but there also is, and it's a bit off-putting for some students in the beginning. I've had one of my dearest friends as a graduate say, "I didn't sign up for a course in science," So they were inundated with the ideas of Brian Swim and Thomas Berry. And so they learn about things like differentiation, autopoiesis, and communion, which were the three forces from the beginning of time that dominate the universe and that still are at work. And they read where Thomas Berry said that, it was either Thomas or Brian, that we are the universe in the form of a human. And it really, for the first time, for a lot of people, it's like, yeah, it's hard to live that. But it's these ideas that keep dropping in, even so this is a seminar, but it continues because the students weave what back when we were at swim, that would apply to what we're doing now with Fritjof Capra systems thinking or something like that.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, Robin, and the opportunity to think about a little bit, like what I guess the thought, and yeah, Phil talks a lot about cosmic education and cosmogenesis and the universe story. And I guess for me, yeah, looking inward to oneself, looking downward toward Earth as our home, was more familiar as I entered ties. And I think, as Linda said, it is just realizing connectedness with all. So I think we maybe are more used to, comfortable with, practiced at looking for and feeling connectedness within our, let's say, ecosystem. But extending that concept of holarchy and the holes within the holes, we want to go all the way to all there is. The connection is not ending with the planet, as grand as she is.
Yeah. I had a question about you were talking about idealism and the idealistic students in the program. I guess what are y'all's opinion on like the perfect student for the TIES program? Like someone that would come to you and be at a certain place in their life or wanting to learn certain things, or I guess what would that student look like?
Great question.
Yeah, terrific
I'm
question.
always amazed of the difference that seems to morph. Sometimes I go back and reread the application after I've gotten to know the student, because it's not the student that I interviewed. Something has happened. So it's a really hard question as to what the preparation. We've had people, ministers, we've had people I thought, why are they doing this? And they take away something significant. It may not be this full image that Paul and Linda just shared of, but they get a bigger context and they're able to fit their particular study into that context. I don't know if there is a TIES prepared student as much as I think there's a force of attraction, allurement at work between what people read about the program and they feel in their bodies, and that connects them. And
Yeah.
that's one of those universe forces that were, Montessori talks about the force of attraction is the force of love. And that's been here since the beginning. We wouldn't have what we have if there wasn't attraction.
Yeah, I would add that I said this last at the last gathering that you guys hosted, Andrea and Cam and Robin and Anu, with Jay talking about his sort of teacher development program and vision, and and my feeling hearing him talk and describe that program was like, you need a certain degree of maturity, a certain capacity for reflection. It doesn't mean you have to be like a doctoral level, like student of holistic education to get a ton out of the program. But it, the capacity to be reflective, to rethink things, to have that vulnerability, like I think that sets you up well for a rich ties experience. That said, like I described this first year teacher who was super young and, kind of overwhelmed just by waking up in the morning. It's not fair. She's a very thoughtful, lovely person. But it was a lot. It was a lot. And I think she left some on the table, which hopefully she goes back to in years to come. That, the only thing I would say for potential future viewers who are looking at this recording, considering it, is I think students who struggle at ties, because we've seen some of that, are those that have not adequately created the space in their life to sink deeply into the weightiness of the program and what it asks of you. So if you were hoping for a quick down and dirty master's degree that you can do online and you can kind of mail it in, and they're not that, the writing requirements are kind of minimal and you could get by with not working too hard, you're going to struggle. So yeah, I guess that would be
There's
my.
also, Paul, and Linda too, you both have seen it. There are people that hit walls with deaths
Mm-hmm.
in their families,
Yep.
spouses, children,
Right.
hospital illnesses, pregnancies. So the faculty, the mentors work with them to create a recovery schedule. And most of the time they make it through extensions that we're not lenient with, but under circumstances permitting, we'll give it people more time.
Mhm. And I feel like at least some of the people that I've worked with, either through facilitating seminars or because they were one of my mentees, so I worked with them much more closely because of that. Um, there are some people who I think in the beginning found the Bohemian dialogue difficult, trying to remain open minded and not be judgmental about what somebody else might suggest, so, that a reading meant. And, part of it, as they said themselves, was part of their upbringing, part of the community that they lived in, the church that their parents took them to, that, that they had trouble wrapping their brains around some of the ideas that were shared. Um, but I witnessed transformation in their thinking that they themselves would write about in their culminating project and say, I didn't realize, that these ideas would excite me. And they were more accepting of the way other people looked at the world. And remember, this is international, so people of many different religions. The program has, I think, inherently a strong spiritual basis, but it's not based on any one religion. Um, I just think that there was a meeting of minds, that people found common ground and people grew and often commented. about how they felt that they grew. And I'm talking about mature people. I'm not talking about like a 25-year-old. I'm talking about like 50 to 60-year-old grad students were like, I can't believe how this program has helped me to open my eyes to the rest of the world. That's really powerful.
I think one, go ahead, Phil.
I'm just gonna, the thing is that they've done it themselves. We've just given them the container.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think one of the challenges students can face within the program is the academic kind of training and expectation that most of us have been conditioned to expect. And the that being, I have an idea and now it's my job to prove it and defend it, you know? And that's so much what we learn to do in secondary and post-secondary education. And sometimes students drop into ties ready for that kind of fight, you know, like I figured it out. I have this insight. This is my thesis. Here's my proof. And now let's fight it out kind of thing. And God, I can't recall the phrase we use to describe the exploratory communication and writing and dialogue, where we're asking questions. You know, we're trying to refrain or at least delay having that thesis, that idea that's ours, that we know to be the truth, that we will, you know, so shifting towards that exploratory approach is can be hard, can be challenging, sometimes for the most accomplished students, academically successful students. So it doesn't mean they haven't also found, as Linda said, transformation and growth throughout the program, but it takes a little bit of patience and a little bit of trust, you know, to suspend that expected way.
So when I taught in Turkey, I often had students from many cultures when I lived there for quite a few years. And I would often pair them up with someone, well, or they could choose their pair sometimes and sometimes choose people who are different than you are, to explore like schools that were holistic alternative schools and then present about them and in a creative way. But are those the kind of assignments that you do, or you do lots? Are there, each course has a different kind of pathway into the learning process and the learning, especially the learning process, I guess, is what I'm interested in.
Okay, I'll go. So I think so a common sort of seminar assignment is to read the book that's the center of that seminar or text, think about the implications, post your thoughts, and respond to others. So that's the weaving. That's one of the ways in which students are asked to engage. But there's a range of super creative provocations that also entice deeper engagement. So I'll just talk about one, which Phil, maybe you want to go deeper into or not, or you could say another. But for example, there's a teaching material that was developed at Ties, right, Phil? Called Our Planet, Our Home. And it is essentially a manipulative invitation for open-ended play for adults. And it involves images on sort of high quality cardboard that can be of elements of the cosmos, a planet, a DNA strand, a strawberry, and then arrows and other sort of graphic tools that can be, the assignment is for the student to make sense, tell a story, create a narrative using these images that shows relationship. And so there's no one right way to do it. People have very divergent processes and products, and they record or take photos of what they create. And it's just a provocation that leads the student to explore their own minds and hearts, maybe, way of organizing and meaning making. And so they're, engaging with this manipulative, they're creating this sort of story. Often they're like, I don't know if I did it right. And that's like, yeah, there's no right way. Of course, every way is right. It was right for you in that moment. Try it again next week. It'll be different. Watch someone else do it. It'll blow your mind. Like, but it is, and then you're using that experience to help you place yourself within these big concepts of consciousness, connection, ecology, epistemology, all the kinds of things we're talking about as the more official curriculum. So that's an example of an assignment.
And if I can tag along and just share some of the things I've observed from that. So the members of a cohort at a certain point in time, they're to take this kit and share it with a group of people of their own choosing. It might be, other teachers in their school. It might be some students in their own class. Might be family members, because usually this occurred at a point in the some semester where there was a holiday. So very often people were together for like Thanksgiving or something like that. So sometimes it was just family members who'd come together to celebrate. And what I observed, is that whenever somebody shared it with kids, the kids just dove in. They were like, "Oh, let's put this here." I mean, sometimes they'd have little debates, and no, I want to do it this way. But the kids are like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah," because you don't give them any rules. You don't, you just give them this collection. Say, well, so use the pictures and the arrows to make sense to you. To tell a story and such, and the ones that usually say, "Oh, I worry, I don't think I got it right." Those are the adults. Usually, those are the adults, and they're kind of afraid because they've been so conditioned, that they might be wrong. Maybe I'm just not doing it the right way, and they're usually more frozen about trying the activity. It's pretty interesting to see that.
And I just would add that the academic preparation for that activity is a thesis called An Ecogenesis for Education, Learning Communities by Gaian Design. So there's an imprint.
Learning communities by what?
Gaian Design, G-A-I-N.
G-A-I. Okay. Gaian design.
Well, I have been stewing with thoughts this whole time, and I just keep coming back to this thought that I have this hope that there's more holistic, integrative educators in the world, but they're not going to come unless they have an experience in which they get the opportunity to feel what that's like for them. And obviously, ties is an example of a place like this. I think getting to be in a school or observe a teacher who's doing that work firsthand feels like another opportunity for humans to learn a different way of what education can look like and how to do that. But it feels so hard when, like we were saying, like you've gone through public school and this is the way that we've been taught, and this is just so different. And so I guess I'm just relieved that TIES exists, because I didn't know about it until relatively recently. I know when I was searching for master's programs, I kept saying, well, I know that I want to learn how to work with children. I know that I want to be an educator, but I don't want to go get a master's in education because none of that sounds fun or aligned with the values that I believe are important to developing human potential. And so, yeah, I guess I'm just grateful that this is here, and I hope that more programs continue to develop in this direction, because otherwise, how will we create more humans that are capable of this type of work?
And I think that dominates the landscape of teacher preparation. It's do as I say, not as I do. And it's replete, and definitely in Montessori education. In fact, she started it. It was like she didn't teach in a Montessori way. She gave lessons that, because of her charisma, got people going. As the generations have come and gone, it's left with the details, not the essence. And so it's like, I used to ask myself a question: how can you teach democracy in a non-democratic way? This was way before I was involved at this level of education.
Yeah. And I would go one step further in saying that so many teacher preparation programs are intentionally trying to cultivate the antithesis of what you're looking for, Andrea. And I think it is the explicit purpose of so many teacher ed programs to develop competencies that it boil down to behavior management and assessment. And it has nothing to do with the phrase you used was something, the unfolding of the human or something. Like, yeah, that's not the point. That's not how or why we're educating teachers to work with children. It has nothing to do with the children or their journey and so I really agree with you that traditional adult education now is sort of off, off base, off topic, off track, and irrelevant. But even worse, I think it is actually like pointed in the exact wrong direction, and it is in many ways responsible for the repressive, autocratic, dominator kinds of classrooms that we have accepted.
Yeah, well said.
Well, on
That's
that
not
uplifting
okay.
note,
So yeah, I don't know, like in this moment, this is another discussion for another time. Like in this moment of the dismantling of the Department of Education, for example, and the values that are being embodied by our political leaders. Like, what do we do with that? I'm actually really confounded by by that. How do you educate holistically in a time of autocracy and anti-democratic racism and but I think I do think
It's
ties.
a great topic for it.
Yeah, next time. But
It really is.
I think ties is a gift, and it's been such an honor and privilege to just be able to stand beside students while they're on their journeys, which I really feel like in that way, it does feel very analogous to me not being a formally trained Montessori educator. It strikes me as very familiar as being in the role of the guide in a Montessori classroom. I'm there to witness, be a resource for, be present for the students, but it's their journey.
Yeah, and in creating ties, Phil has really captured the essence, cosmic education that Montessori tried to communicate, but so many people were focused on the details of, you do this lesson this way, and at this point you raise your pinky finger, it's like, and it just got lost in those details instead of, as you said, the essence of Montessori. So thank you for that, Phil.
It was the force of attraction.
Hey, Phil, do you want to plug the Syntropy course?
Oh, yeah. So beginning on March 8th, there are 4 courses that we're offering called Syntropy, Integrating Montessori Thought and Process. Not so much about Montessori, just as well you could put holistic education in place of that, but it's the first one is on love as syntropy. The second one is on cosmogenesis. The third one is on observation, and the fourth on dialogue. And it comes out of the syntropy is a word that was coined by an Italian mathematician in the 40s, which is not an opposing force to entropy, but a counterbalance to entropy, which brings forth creativity and and is an attractor towards love.
And it's one of the rare opportunities, I would say. Occasionally, TIES has hosted seminars and publicly facing educational projects, but it's rare. This is a rare opportunity to get a taste of TIES without being an enrolled master's student. So I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, Phil.
Yes.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you,
Linda.
thank you,
all
Andrea.
for being here.
You have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you. I really appreciated all your insights into TIES.